because the stream now says the stream is live.
Okay.
So I assume we're in business. We're on YouTube.
Okay. So like I said, if you need to restart anything, that's fine. Just
Okay.
make sure there's a pause so I can edit. So it should be something like, and so as I was wait, let me start that again. So as I was saying, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Good. Nope, I can do that. And you had a question from yesterday. Spoilers. How much do I avoid them?
I think a document 4,000 years old can be spoiled. I think we're okay.
But there are spoilers about specific to the movie.
I think movie spoilers are fine too.
Okay.
So we kind of assume people have seen the movie. So
okay,
we're good there.
Sounds good. All right.
Let me get us started.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, today we are diving deep into the past. We are talking about the Odyssey, both on film and on page. And not only are we diving into the past in terms of topic, but also in terms of guest. One of the first people who I got to have fun talking about ethical issues in crazy things we were watching was Mr. Adam Kamisis. Adam was a friend of mine in high school, someone I've not seen in probably 30 years, but a classics professor, a specialist in all things Greek and Roman, and someone who I know have been talking to about the Odyssey and the original and all that. And so wanted to bring him on and have this conversation because obviously there's been a lot of public conversation about this. We want to chat about that. We want to chat about what are the ethical questions involved in adapting something from such a different time, and what are the ethical questions raised by both our Mr. Homer, whoever that might have been, and our Mr. Christopher Nolan in the more modern day. So Adam, hello and welcome.
Hello, Matt. It's wonderful to see you again, and thank you for inviting me on here. This is going to be fun. This is
my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
So first, just give us a quick version of your background, both in terms of like what you studied and also in relation to Homer's epic itself, or one of Homer's second epic, I should say.
Sure. So I'm a professor at the U of Alberta. I mostly am actually a Roman historian. I work on Roman history and the literature, the Roman Empire. But I have a background in classics. I read all of this stuff. I teach it at the undergraduate level. I actually teach the Iliad almost every year in translation. I haven't actually taught the Odyssey in quite a number of years, but in detail. But I teach the mythology that's involved in it, and I probably, read or had read to me this poem for the first time when I was a little kid. I don't know, long time. So I can't really remember a time when I didn't know who Odysseus was. So, and it's a poem that I've reread, in English and parts of it in Greek several times over my life, and thought, every time it's one of those poems, every time you think about it every time you come back to it, you think about it, you think new things about it. You find a new poem in it. You find stuff that you never knew was there before, or meanings in the stuff you knew was there, and that's what one of the things that sets some works of literature apart, and the Odyssey is one of those.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think I read the original until I don't remember if this was one of the classes we took together, but in freshman English class, I remember we read parts of the Iliad, and that inspired me to read the original of the Odyssey.
It must have been separate, because I remember reading the Odyssey with Miss Diatolo. I don't know who you had.
Okay, yeah, I think I had Mr. Johnson. But anyway, I remember reading both of them, and and I was someone who had read a lot of Greek myths as a child, and what I read was
know all of that stuff.
Yeah, but what I'd read was the very sanitized version that you get in like the children's versions of those things, and I think that's an interesting part of this discussion as well. And then much more recently, I have been reintroduced to the story through the Percy Jackson books, which I've really loved.
Sure.
Which are again giving a fairly sanitized version. That would be a whole other topic I should discuss at some point. But and then of course I've seen the movie and have been working my way through the Emily Watson translation, which will be a
Oh,
subject to discuss as well.
yeah.
So let me just ask, what did you think of the movie?
Um, it's a Christopher Nolan movie that like uses the plot and character of the Odyssey, right? And like in that sense, if you, I wasn't familiar with his work, with his movies before. It's not hugely my kind of thing. Bits of it were a lot of fun. There were scenes I really liked. The way that they did Cersei and the pigs, the kind of body horror kind of aspect of that. For whatever reason, that one jumped out to me. But it's a movie that I think all Christopher Nolan fans will love,
Right.
or probably have been into, and people who come to it as a film adaptation of the Odyssey are going to have more mixed feelings,
Right.
and that includes me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's going to be a big part of what we're discussing today, is kind of how faithful or non-faithful an adaptation it is, and why that is, and how that's important, and whether you really can be faithful to something from such a different time. And I wanted to start out by kind of naming one of, I think, the sillier controversies, but one that's out there a bit.
Of course.
To be clear, you're not worried that a woman born out of an egg is supposed to not look like Lupita. Am I correct in that?
Of course. I mean, that is not an issue about Homer. That is not an issue about ancient Greece. That is an issue about the insecurities of some modern white people and their inability to deal with narratives in which they are not completely central. And it's a thing that it's an issue that is of interest to me professionally, because the idea of right-wing appropriation of the ancient world in general is a worrying thing. And so the controversy that has come up over this is an outgrowth of something much bigger and really quite nasty. And so in that sense, I've read and followed some of this stuff, but in terms of my assessment of the film, it's completely not an issue.
Right. Yeah, this idea that of taking ancient Greece, and certainly also its mythology, not as a historical document, but trying to impose our modern idea of whiteness upon that. My understanding is Greece is a trading culture. Like there was contact with Ethiopian people and all these kinds of things at that point in time.
Yes, and Ethiopian people are mentioned in the Homeric poems. And I mean the Greeks were certainly capable of what we would call racial prejudice. It didn't happen to focus very much around skin color, and this is an issue that again people are exploring. There's some important current scholarship. The field of studying Greek perceptions of blackness and skin color is something that's really just starting to be studied in the last about 5 years or so.
Right.
Some important stuff has come out, and from a much more nuanced perspective. But I mean, the idea that Greece is some white space that you can go back to get away from modern woke diversity, whatever. Clearly, what is behind all of this is nonsense, historically speaking.
Okay, so putting that aside, what are some of the things you felt did not translate? Because let me actually state what I think is the one that I've heard the most. I'm curious how you talk about it. And this is somewhat coming from Emily Watson, who was the translator, who had a lot to say about it, but also I've heard this from others, that in Homer, Odysseus is basically that at the time that of the Homeric poems being written, and obviously we don't know if Homer was a real person and all of that kind of thing, but at the time they're written, the attitude towards warfare and towards glory and towards the right of warriors to pillage and take what they want in terms of loot and women and all this kind of thing is just incredibly incongruous with our understanding of these things today. And that this is very much kind of a modern take on those kind of questions. Is that a fair statement?
I mean, I have heard that argument. I don't entirely. I have issues with the way they've done the character of Odysseus. I wouldn't go as far as a blanket statement and say nobody in Greece had the kind of issues that Nolan portrays, that Nolan's version of Odysseus has.
Right.
It's clear people did have issues over people who had fought in wars in antiquity,
Right.
had issues over trauma. They had doing and experiencing huge amounts of horrific violence does things
Right.
uh, to the people who are involved in it, and that is true of ancient Greece as it is for now. And there are works of ancient Greek literature. I'm thinking of Euripides as Heracles, maybe Sophocles as Ajax, both tragedies from a later period that really do seem to portray characters who have something akin to what is now often called, what
Right.
now often called
PTSD.
PTSD.
Wait, they might not have had the term back then, but the brain chemistry of how human brains react to trauma and to violence is not fundamentally different then as it is now.
Something, and I mean, it's going to be processed through a different cultural lens. The things that people would experience guilt or inability to process in various ways are going to be different because their culture has different ideas about war, but there's no culture that can like war-proof you.
Right.
Again, that I think is often kind of among other things, a fantasy that some people on the right have. But having said all of that, and this actually one of my former professors from grad school posted on Facebook about this. It's a whole long argument, lots and lots of comments. I don't see that in Odysseus's character in Homer. There are characters in antiquity who do, I think, display who look a lot more like Christopher Nolan's version of Odysseus than Homer's version of Odysseus does, if that makes sense. So, I mean, that's an issue people have discussed. I mean, it is related to, I think, the issue that probably, and I should start out by saying, this is my, professional colleagues, professional classics people. There's a huge range of opinion about this. There's like total people are totally into it. There's people who are totally who think it's totally awful, and probably like, let's put it this way, it's way more skewed toward the positive than, say, certainly than like 300, probably than Troy. It's scored better than those have. But I mean, the issue that a lot of people have brought up that I think I do agree with is that Nolan, for kind of understandable reasons, has made Odysseus a much simpler and frankly kind of one-dimensional character than what he is in Homer. In Homer, Odysseus has moments of depression. He has moments of joy. He gets hungry. He gets horny. He gets cocky and yells at the Cyclops and tells him his name, and he gets all weepy and emotional with Penelope and with his father at the end, and there's a huge range of stuff. And I mean, when you add it all up, it doesn't actually add up to a terribly nice person.
Right.
But it adds up to a hugely fully developed character.
Mm.
In Nolan's version is real good at brooding and like reflecting on the violence he's done and conveying a particular message that Nolan wants to. But he doesn't do a lot else.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, there's the reflection on the cost of war, and that's what I want to get into, kind of like how that felt different than the Homeric idea. But you're right. I think also certainly the trickery. Like I think part of why I really kind of latched on to Odysseus, and I think a lot of kids who got really into Greek myths did. I'm sure there are incredibly athletic jock kids who also love Greek myths, but a lot of us who read those were pretty nerdy, and he was often portrayed, at least especially in that kind of like watered down for kids versions, as someone who, yes, he might have had the big muscles of an Achilles or someone else like that, but he had intellect. He outsmarted his opponents, not just out bench pressed them or whatever. The Greek equivalent.
No, that's his absolutely defining characteristic. Yeah.
And so when he never says to the Cyclops that I am nobody, like to have that moment taken away, and to have a lot of his trickery. I want to talk about kind of his trickery portrayed almost as negative when it happens, but to have it just taken away entirely felt like, I think for me and for a lot of people, like, wait, that's our favorite part of the character. Where did that go?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with you that he, like, the things that sometimes make you root for him, the things that make Athena really like him, his defining characteristic, even in the Iliad, and certainly in all of subsequent Greek literature, is that he's the smartest guy in the world, and and that he always wants to find out and know more, and that's a major motivation for everything that he does throughout the poem. And in the Odyssey, in Homer, that's what kind of creates the tension in his character between wanting to go home and wanting to explore and experience more.
Right.
And that's missing in Nolan. Yeah.
And that's also what makes him so beloved to Athena, right? Because she is the goddess of wisdom and a goddess of warfare. And so someone who uses wisdom and not just brute strength when it comes to warfare is particularly appealing to her.
No, and there's a magnificent scene that is not in the movie, but when Odysseus gets back to Ithaca, he meets Athena, who's in disguise, and they start talking, and Odysseus starts spinning her this whole line about he's from Crete, he's a merchant, he tells her a whole phony life story, and at some point she just starts laughing and is like, this is why I love you, Odysseus. You make up all of this like crazy bullshit stuff, and like as if you're one of very few human beings who I can like have an interest, who can be on my mental level,
Right. Well, and so that gets to what I think is one of the most interesting changes that Nolan makes, and in that it feels like a central thesis of the movie is that the Trojan horse was a violation of the rules of war, and that, among other things, one of the people who's angry at him for it is Athena herself, and that part of that is because, and I think this is not as much like the cause, it is kind of a personification of it, is that he at one point sees that that Athena's temple itself in Troy is desecrated and pillaged, and that he sees in one of the maidens, one of the priestesses of that temple, the face of Athena herself. And you can say, like, was that actually Athena because of the rule of, treat a stranger well because they might be the god in disguise, or that now he's seeing the goddess in the persona of that priestess who was killed. But either way, it seems like Nolan has this idea that was kind of like dishonorable warfare and therefore not okay. And a lot of what Odysseus is going through is because of that and his need to make amends for it. That's completely an invention of Nolan, right? That my understanding is that feels very against the spirit of what Homer was writing.
Certainly in Homer, this is one of the things that changes about Odysseus's character in Greek literature over antiquity, right? Homer basically is pretty much as you say. He thinks of the horse as a really smart idea that Odysseus invented. There does not seem to be any particular moral issue with it.
Right.
There is the relationship between Athena and Odysseus in the Odyssey does seem to go through, like, something happens between Athena and Odysseus that probably does have to do with the violation of her temple in Troy. But doesn't particularly have to do with the horse, and I don't think it's particularly even directed at Odysseus personally. But
Right.
she doesn't appear to Odysseus in person throughout his voyages, only when he gets back to Ithaca.
Right. But she doesn't she?
Yeah.
Doesn't she intervene on his behalf with Poseidon?
Yeah, she in the scenes with the gods, she's still kind of basically rooting for him.
Right.
But there's some kind of this is one of those details. This is one of the sort of specialist aspects of it that people chase down that I'm not
Yeah, that's fair.
as familiar with. But basically, so Nolan didn't pull the idea of an estrangement with Athena entirely out of thin air, but the idea that the Trojan horse is a violation above, and I mean, in Nolan's version, he tries really hard to link it to a violation of hospitality.
Right.
The Zeus's law that they keep talking about, which doesn't make any sense. The Greeks aren't guests in the Troy; they're attacking Troy.
Right.
But be that as it may, in what then happens is that in later literature, Odysseus's character, especially in Greek tragedy and to some extent in Virgil, gets turned. His deceit, what Homer interprets as kind of cunning trickster stuff that you root for, becomes an amoral, deceptive character when you get Sophocles or Virgil a few centuries later. So that's a very standard way the characters in Greek myth. It's an example that I use in my course every year of how some characters in different works of literature can do different things with the same mythological character while always preserving certain aspects.
Right.
So Odysseus always has to be smart. There is no version of Odysseus myth in which Odysseus is stupid, unless it's like a parody or something. He has to be smart, but he can be good smart or bad smart.
Right.
And that you can play with as an author.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense because, and again, here I'm speaking to the expert. You can tell me if I'm wrong. But my understanding is that Rome had more of a tradition of kind of like martial honor and like the fair fight type thing. And so deception and warfare being more looked down upon in that culture makes some sense to me.
Well, certainly that's what the Romans thought of themselves.
Okay, that's also fair statement.
And they thought of in the Aeneid, the Trojan horse is thought of as a stereotypical Greek act of deception.
Right.
That's where the line "I fear Greeks bearing gifts" or "Beware Greeks bearing gifts."
Right.
That it actually comes from that part of the Aeneid and refers specifically to the Trojan horse.
And it being important that Aeneas is himself
Yeah.
a descendant of Troy, in that
Yeah.
regard. So, which obviously colors his
Yeah.
behavior.
No, and that.
Well,
Yeah.
and then I think that statement also is really interesting for the whole project of what we talk about here, because one of the things that I love to talk about is that when we're doing modern versions of superhero characters, you know, you look at someone like Batman. Batman has been written and rewritten over literally
Yeah. No.
just about 100 years by now, maybe a little less. Superman like 90 or so. And in that time, different people have written them in very different ways. You know, even just on TV, we have this image of Batman often as being very against the cops and very like chasing down corrupt cops. But the Adam West Batman that was on TV when you and I were kids,
Yes.
in reruns, to be clear, we're not that old, but
Yes, indeed.
but you know that one, like, you know, talked to the commissioner all the time and like was in very good terms with the cops. The point being that even in just like the 80 years of those characters, you can go back to the original texts and find wildly different versions of the story. And so it feels to me like it makes sense that with something like Odysseus, it's the exact same thing. It's just, instead of now in terms of like 8 or 9 decades, we're talking about 8 or 9 centuries, if not many more. Of,
no. So
you know,
there's
ancient.
the universe builds up in lots of different, but yeah,
Mhm.
it's an example that I use for my students when I'm talking about myth. I sort of use the example of Star Wars, but you know, superheroes work the same way, that you have a sort of, you know, some number of very important canonical works and things in different media and things building on that, and you have fan fiction and you have, you know, artistic, you know, depictions in different media and whatever.
Well, and so that's actually a good segue into the next thing I want to ask about, which is, I don't know if you remember this at all. We may not have had you in these conversations, but my mother used to love to talk about the Star Trek of the 60s as being one of the best illustrations of the hopefulness of that era. And how later versions of Star Trek are being told in times that don't have that kind of like everything is possible of the 60s and have somewhat different mindsets. And part of my understanding of what happens between Homer through Virgil and everyone else all the way up to Nolan is, we talked about, you know, whether PTSD existed and the like, but like in Nolan, there's a whole idea of the warriors from the sea who are coming to pillage and how terrible it is and how it's the death of civilization. And Odysseus realizing that it's his own men who are causing it and that Troy had apparently led to it and things like that. My understanding, and in part comes, I admit, from Wilson, and so maybe we can talk about her translation, but my understanding is that that kind of behavior of proud, heroic Greek warriors traveling from place to place and pillaging towns in order to get the supplies they needed, like that's how you got glory and honor, and that wasn't looked down on as this massive attack on civilization. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and Odysseus, I mean, there's a tension that you get in these works between the mentality that you've more or less described, which is clearly what Odysseus does, like with, you know, the first thing that he does after leaving Troy is to find, and this is briefly described in the movie, this other people called the Sicones, and plunder them and steal everything that isn't nailed down, kill people, enslave them, do the whole 9 yards. And he doesn't seem to have an issue with that. But there are characters, notably Achilles in the Iliad, often brings up the idea that the Trojans really haven't done anything to me. Why should I be attacking them? I mean, in the sort of ethic of the Homeric world, revenge is a very powerful justification for violence. And Agamemnon and Menelaus particularly, nobody questions that he has a motivation to fight the Trojans and that he is entitled to take revenge on them in whatever way he can pull off. The idea that the whole of Greece shows up, and a whole bunch of people that have nothing particular to do with this, is never certainly outright condemned in Homer, but it's more complicated. And in Odysseus again doesn't have a personal reason to be mad at the Trojans.
Right.
And in this isn't, I don't think Homer ever mentions this, but in other versions of the myth, Odysseus didn't want to go to Ithaca.
Right.
He had to be tricked actually into going. He
Right.
pretended to be mad. And so there's, again, Homer is aware, and people in antiquity are aware, that starting a war and taking other people's stuff for no particular reason is ethically questionable, to say the least, although some people still do it.
Right.
It's funny, in Thucydides has this one observation where he says, back in the old days, people didn't think piracy was such a problem. And you can tell that, among other things, from Homer. And he quotes various bits of Homer. So, so that's kind of, it is, but Odysseus is more, I would say, on the pirate end of that spectrum, for
Right.
want of a better.
And I think that's also an important point, is that, and also kind of illustrating the length of time we're discussing, is that when people try to make a simple point of like, oh, folks in ancient Greece believed, well, even at that time, works like this were debated and discussed, but also the time period you're discussing is like 1,000 years in terms of going from the ancient times of Homer to the what is to us still antiquity, but is still much, more to someone like Sophocles or whatever, would have seen themselves as much more modern.
Well, and I mean, to Sophocles, from Homer to Sophocles is probably close to 300 years. And then you have, but people keep asking these questions clear down into the Christian Middle Ages.
Right. And until today, which someone like Noah's doing. And I guess kind of my point is, so I feel like, and this isn't meant as a defense of Nolan, but just as kind of a further discussion of it, it feels like Nolan is definitely making choices, but I feel like to really try and present Odysseus in the way that Homer presents him in our world today, which has such very different ideas of what is acceptable in warfare and what is acceptable for warrior people to do, it'd be hard to do that without him coming across as the villain of the story.
Well, or certainly without him coming across as kind of a dick. I mean, he's, there are a lot of other people in this story that's worse. So, I mean, it is, yes, part of this clearly is there are only certain characters you can ask Matt Damon to play. And the way that he does, and he clearly wants to make Odysseus, you keep hearing the words relatable, redeemable, something like that. I will say, though, one thing that kind of unsettles me about the way that this goes. On the one hand, so Nolan wants to make Odysseus, as we said, relatable, redeemable, whatever it is. So, okay, Odysseus still does all of this violence. He's still an enslaver, a colonizer, or whatever. But he feels really bad about it. So, okay, and that makes him a redeemable character and whatever. But Nolan takes out the sex entirely. Odysseus does not have sex with Circe. He does not have sex with Calypso. He does not commit adultery as we would define it. Does that mean that adultery makes you non-redeemable, non-relatable, but like committing mass murder is redeemable and relatable?
I think to some extent it is, particularly when and I think here this is a place where our culture has changed significantly, and I don't think necessarily in a bad way, because the fundamental point of the fundamental sort of drama of the story at the end is his battle to win back Penelope. And I think that in our culture, someone who has violated the marital vows then being portrayed as being unrepentant about that, but still trying to win back the love of the person he's married to, becomes very complicated. Whereas at the time this is written, and probably for most of the time it's being interpreted, what happens in Libya stays in Libya. What happens on Crete's Island stays on Calypso's Island, whatever it is. And there's never any discongruence between the idea of he slept with all these other people while he was off to war, but now that he's back, he wants to win back Penelope, his wife, and his home. And again, I don't want to paint in kind of wildly disparaging terms about, Homerian ideas, but I certainly think I'm on solid ground saying that like the relative importance of female agency and of women as characters rather than as possessions to be, fought over and won is at least significantly better now than it was at that point. So
I mean, I guess I'd be more willing to accept that argument if the movie's women characters were more developed as characters. And that's another criticism. Like,
I should say as a corollary, I should say I'm talking about modern audiences. I do think Nolan Nolan could have far better developed those characters in many ways. Totally agree with you. I'm just saying I think he realized I think you are right. And I'm saying I agree with you that I think Nolan realized if he showed Odysseus having sex with either of Calypso or Circe, let alone both, audiences would have had a harder time buying him as truly being like besotted with, Penelope and wanting to win her back in the way that the movie gets to.
No, I think that, yes, I would agree. I imagine that Nolan simply could not think of how he would write that scene with Penelope. Presumably, I mean, the only way that it could have worked for a modern audience or current like mass film, like blockbuster film audience, would presumably have been to have Penelope in some way forgive him. And Nolan would have had to write that convincingly. And I wouldn't want that job.
Yeah.
Like that I can see, but I don't know. It's still like, it still feels like an odd set of priorities. What can I say?
Agreed. Well, I guess let me ask it this way. And again, I don't know how much of an expert on, ancient Greek matrimonial practices you are. I'm guessing it's not high up on your list. I guess kind of what I was trying to say is that my understanding is that to the listeners of Homer, to the readers of Homer, there would not be a presumption that Penelope is expecting him to remain sexually monogamous while he's off on this 20-year adventure. Am I wrong about that?
Certainly. Well, probably as a practical expectation, you're correct. This is a world in which it was known that men had more sexual opportunities than women and would take advantage of them. That doesn't mean emotionally that Penelope would have accepted it or been fine with it. Okay. Odysseus never mentions it to her. I forget. I mean, at the end, we're told Odysseus gives her a brief recap of his adventures, and I'm pretty sure. I can't remember if he mentioned Circe or Calypso at all, but he, so, and even though he's perfectly happy to tell those stories to the Phaeacians, the people who are hosted in the Odyssey, they're the people to whom he tells his story, not to Calypso. But I mean, it's still an emotionally fraught issue, but it's one where there's the culture gives women a lot less ethical support. Let's put it that way.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, and in some ways, I guess, if part of Nolan's goal is to kind of tell this story through our modern ethical lens, it is disappointing then that he kind of avoids that issue entirely. Because I think that would have been a much more interesting, kind of. But I agree with you. Also, it could have gone very badly. It would have to have done a lot better writing of all the characters involved. Well, let's then switch to, I think, a part of the discourse that a lot of people are focused on, which is that Nolan has said he's based his movie on the translation that was done recently by a classicist named Emily Wilson. And my understand, I've read some of that. I've not read all of it, but my understanding is that that's where some of the kind of more modern language comes from.
Yes.
Polemically is referring to Odysseus's dad, for example.
I
other
think
things
that
like
does
that.
in fact happen somewhere in Wilson's translation. Yes.
But also that she has now since come out
100%. I'm not 100% sure the dad thing, but I think
yeah. But that spirit of things.
Yeah.
But she has now since come out and been very critical of the movie. I'm curious, kind of your understanding of her perspective. Well, first, I guess, from your perspective, kind of how was her translation regarded, in terms of the classics world?
It has been a hit. With classicists as well as everybody else. And it is a very modernizing translation. People do speak in language that is much more recognizable than most other translations you would get. Wilson, and I think that has found its way into the dialogue of the movie. What Wilson does not do, and what she, I think, is calling out Nolan for doing, is simplifying the story along with the language.
Right.
And her, she wrote this very long negative review in the London Review of Books, and I mean, a lot of it was basically, you've left out the best bits.
Yeah.
And for that, I can't disagree with her.
Right.
And I don't know how you would get all of the best bits into a 3-hour like Hollywood movie. And I think you could probably do it, but I can imagine somebody doing a better job than Nolan has.
Yeah.
But to do it completely right would be impossible. It takes about 15 hours to read the whole Odyssey.
When this first came out, I remember thinking, how is this going to be a movie? This should be a 10-episode show, with like an episode on the Cyclops and an episode on dealing with the sirens. Totally.
If you had the money.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess that kind of comes to the kind of main question, or the final question, but kind of how this all wraps up is, for you as a classicist, for you as someone who kind of, makes their work and their study has been on these works of literature, what do you think is the sort of responsibility of modern people creating art based on that? And actually, I'll start with, have you read the Percy Jackson books? Or do you know?
Not actually, I admit. My students frequently, I've now had 10 years worth of students whose first introduction to,
I'm sure,
to Greek myth was Percy Jackson. So I have a vague idea of what goes on.
What's your kind of main takeaway from them in terms of how you feel about them?
I'm glad. Look, I mean, I'm glad somebody's doing it. And I think this is true of most classicists. While we may get kind of finicky about details and do things like the things that Wilson has brought up and everything. And I, by the way, I do not personally know Emily Wilson. I don't know her views on anything like this, but like most thing, we like it when somebody out there draws the attention of the public to what it is that we do and teach. And it then gives, if we don't like the way that the other person has done it, the movie or the novels or whatever, then we're like, okay, but it'll give us a chance to do it right, because we're going to rely on our students to say, okay, I've read Percy Jackson. I know that there's more out there. I want to explore it. Oh, here's this professor that will teach it to me. And we're very happy about that. I mean, the exception is when there are portrayals of the ancient world that are used for agendas that are in some way problematic, antisocial, racist, homophobic, whatever it may be. And I mean, that's like, and there are gray areas. Like, I wish the 300 had never been made. I don't care. I got a few people into my classes because they had seen that, and not anything personal about those students, but in general, the greater cultural impact of it has clearly been negative, and that is something that you can pretty well document.
And this is a very minor part of the inaccuracy leading to problems, but I was friends with someone who I met through kind of like a group of kind of guys talking about dating situations and things like that, who was himself of Greek ancestry, and said that he complained that it gave an impression about the hairiness of most Greek men's chests that was deeply inaccurate, as he phrased it. Small quibble compared to what you're talking about, but
but part of the part of the larger, like pernicious kind of masculinity that will be promoted. I mean, the question then for classicists is, what other movies go in that category? I would not put Nolan there. Maybe Emily Wilson would. I'm not sure. I don't want to speak for her. Her reviews there speaks for herself. But like for most of us, that has to get pretty. You have to get pretty high up on the things have to get pretty bad before we're willing to say, to say this publicity is bad publicity.
So you would put this closer to Percy Jackson than to the 300.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm glad it's been made. I'm glad that there is the interest that it has generated. I think it will, on balance, get a lot. I mean, I know a number, including Liz, my partner, has have gone out and read the Odyssey because the film is there and because it's part of public discourse, and it's and I'm then here doing this with you and whatever, and that in the greater scheme of things, this is good. And
I mean, like I said, I think I first got into Greek myths because I saw a movie called Clash of the Titans, and
which I still show in my class, in one of my classes, by the way.
Oh, awesome! So I was gonna say that movie, as I understand, is wildly inaccurate.
Well, of course it is.
The Kraken being something from Norse mythology, the Titans being a specifically named group in Greek mythology who are not who it's talking about in the movie.
And the Greeks did not have little metal flying owls that made noises like R2-D2.
So how do you use it in your class?
When I'm teaching Jason, or excuse me, Perseus, it's basically the telling of Perseus mythology. So I just show it to the students. It's the end of the semester. Everybody's tired. My main purpose in doing this is to let students know what the world was like before CGI.
Yeah.
Because, what do they know?
Yeah. It's a good reminder.
And everybody laughs their ass off. It's immense fun.
I'm glad. Well, Adam, this has been a great conversation. Is there any last things you want to say about the movie or the work or things like that?
I really hope that this will get people to read more, and also to go on and to read the Iliad. Oh, and one thing I will plug: if anybody wants a chaser for the Odyssey, did you ever see the 1990s Armand Assante version of the Odyssey?
I don't think I did. No.
It's free on YouTube. You can get it.
Okay.
It is hilarious. And it's like, it takes itself far less seriously than Nolan. But at the same time, I will say the women in it have much better written parts.
That's good to know.
Better written roles, and there's a lot more fun. Bernadette Peters is Circe. She's hilarious.
She's great.
But yeah. So if anybody, it's about 3 hours long. It was a TV miniseries. I'm gonna plug that as an alternative.
Well, I will definitely put a link to that in the show notes. And just to round that out, if people are like, well, I really want to hear more about what this Professor Kamisis guy has to say about things, are there publications of yours that people can find?
I suppose they can probably find me on the internet. But there are a couple of books that I would, if people are looking for further stuff, not by me, but about the Odyssey. People who are looking for something about, we were talking earlier about issues of race and appropriation of classics and so forth. There's an important new book on this. It's called The White Pedestal by Curtis Dozier, Dozier. I can send you a link to it or put that in the chat. Yeah, I can just put that in the chat right now. And it's basically, when I was talking about there are issues to do with right-wing appropriation of classics and so forth. It's a full sort of survey of that. And but sorry, I'm just putting this in the sorry, the chat window is out. Yeah, there is that. And the second book, for people, again, same issue, for people who, I said there was a lot of new stuff on blackness and the perception of skin color and so forth in ancient Greece. This book by Sarah Derbu, it's a pretty serious academic book. And so is Dozier's. I'm not saying it's not, but this is basically complicate for years and years. We all just said people in antiquity didn't care about skin color, right. And this is basically an attempt to nuance that idea and to say, well, yes, they did, not in the same way that people do in the 19th and 20th century, but it was not nothing. Right. So Sarah Derbu, Untangling Blackness in Greek Antiquity.
Awesome. I'll look at those and we'll keep talking about it. Well, Adam, thank you so much. Really hope
it's been good. It's been great. Yeah.
And to our listeners, as always, let us know what you think. We'd love to have you write in. You can write to me at matthew@theethicalpanda.com, or of course find all the contact information in the show notes. We'd love to hear you talk about this on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, any of those places where you want to continue the conversation. If you have a mechanical owl that can fly to us with your message, better than a carrier pigeon, no animals are being abused, do that too. Please check out all the other conversations happening on this podcast, on my fellow podcast, Star Wars Generations. Of course, I'm wrapping up my time on the Marvel Movie Minute, where we've been discussing the the Captain America Winter Soldier movie. And yeah, thanks again for being a part of this. Thank you to Adam. On behalf of all of us, we have spoken.